So welcome everybody. Very last session of Summit 2017. Isn't that great? You all probably feel like this guy. You know, you've been out there gathering all these carrots and basically stowing them away so you can go home and research some stuff some more and figure out what to do next. I want to argue that you probably want to take another carrot away from our talk and study up on it and take it further. So, what does an award-winning restaurant and Open Innovation Labs have in common? Think about that question as we kind of start diving into the talk here, and we'll get to the answer, or at least some of the answers to it, and then see where that takes you. So welcome. I'm Øystein Bedin, Senior Infrastructure Architect at Open Innovation Labs. And with me I have Justin Holmes, who is Senior Application Architect for Open Innovation Labs. So the talk today, we kind of been trying to figure out how do we best present this topic. How do we do the Open Innovation Labs DevOps experience? So we figured out, why don't we step you through the journey that we've been taking to get to the point we are right now. And a lot of you probably went to the keynote and heard all the references to Open Innovation Labs and what we're actually being able to accomplish is in a fairly short amount of time. So we're going to step through the journey as far as the business cases for digital transformation. And I'm sure if you've gone to other talks, you probably heard a lot about digital transformation already, and you're going to get our spin on that as well. Labs as a transformation of Red Hat. What does that really mean? So we're going to dive into that a little bit, talk about what that is. And then again, we're going to really dive into the journey that we've had with the Red Hat Open Innovation Labs. And then at the very end, we're going to leave some time for Q&As as well. Sounds good? If so, I'll leave it up to Justin to start the age of digital transformation.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks again for making it to the end here. I know it's a long week. What we wanted to do here is actually build a business case that Red Hat has been building more broadly. That's actually coming from a presentation from Burr Sutter. He gave that at, it was a DevOps conference recently. And it's this idea of teaching elephants to dance is sort of the theme of this. And it's like, how do you take the lumbering organization that you are and transform it into the dancing elephant? That's his goal. So he's got a few quotes here. I'm just going to briefly run through these here. But I think this is one of the biggest ones that's really driving why we're all here, which is this notion that the lifespan of a company is really shrinking because our industries are moving faster. Jim talked about this in our keynote, right? The pace of change, it's just exponential, and it's only going faster and faster and faster. And so because of that, there's this thought that by 2020, 75% of the S&P 500 are going to be new companies. They're not going to be these household names that we've known for a long time. They're really going to be organizations that have been completely disrupted. The Netflix Blockbuster example is really the classic one here. And you know, the same thought, really, the call to action is you're either going to be a winner or a loser in this space. There's really not an in-between. At least that's how the market seems to be shaping up. And so you're going to be prey or you're going to be a predator. And what's really interesting about this is that there seems to be consensus emerging in this space, at least from an executive level. So of executives surveyed by MIT Sloan, which is their business school, about 87% believe that digital technologies are going to transform their industry, but only about 44 thought that they had the right steps in place or the right measures in place to make sure they were prepared. So broadly, the modern economy has acknowledged that there's a lot of change coming, but most companies don't feel like they're ready for it. How do they take the next step? And so this has been well understood, I think, at Red Hat. And the big thing is, I actually don't like the previous quote because it really focuses on the technology part of this. And I think, and most of us here, at least in the labs team, that digital transformation really isn't a technology-first problem. It's really a people-process-first problem. But Red Hat as a company is a product company. So we've traditionally said, this wasn't the place for Red Hat to be working. We're a technology partner, and the people process world, that's something for our strategic partners to work with. That's not our concern. And now that we live in this new world, well, maybe that's not the way that we need to be anymore. Maybe we need to actually transform our own business. And we're starting to see this. We're starting to see customers adopt our next generation technologies and then have production deployment stall because no one's using it, because they haven't changed their own culture and beliefs. And so we've realized that for the success of our own business, long-term platforms like OpenShift, the only way for them to be successful is for us to actually help our customers consume our technology. It's not just a product anymore, it's a people and process thing. And that really led us to this idea of the Open Innovation Lab. Really, and it wasn't just our own discovery, this was a top-down thing. This doesn't really happen often at Red Hat. Things are almost always organic, but this was a top-down thing from our strategic advisory board where our customers came to us and they said at an executive level, yeah, it is time for Red Hat to get into this space. Don't just be a technology partner anymore. We need you to do more. And so about a year ago, we launched this initiative. And what we really learned when we did this is that, well, we needed a sort of a way to communicate the idea. And so Labs is composed of a bunch of food nerds, totally honest. We got a bunch of foodies. And so the way that we've been able to make this idea concrete is to really use this analogy of a kitchen. And so I'm just going to walk through that real quick for you. So the first thing that we realized was fundamentally important is that we needed a place. Any great restaurant has an awesome kitchen. And so what we needed was this open collaborative workspace. It had the best-in-class tools, and it was really built for speed and experimentation. We couldn't just esoterically engage with our customers. We needed a physical place for them to be in. And that's why we're opening up the Labs space. It's just down the street here in the Seaport. We're opening one up in London, which is actually open but kind of soft launched. I was there last week. It's beautiful. And we're working on one right now in Singapore. So this is just the first of what we hope is a very large amount of labs around the world. Once we've got a space, it's really important about who's physically in the space. And this is the idea of the chef. So we needed to bring in not just our expert consultants, but what we realized is that Labs was more than just a consulting offering. Labs was really a way for Red Hat to change the way it engages with our customers. And so the lab space is also going to have access to our engineering teams. It's going to have access to the people driving strategy in the business unit. It's not just a services-led engagement to just do some work. It's really about engaging with some of the best and the brightest in this space across all of the company. And so with this in mind, we've got a space, we've got people in the space. We really need to look at the how of the space. How does it work? How do these people wake up in the morning? How do they have coffee? How do they talk to each other? How do they have lunch? How do they think about the problems that they have? And so we knew continuous delivery was going to be a major part of this from the get-go. It allowed us to have speed and control. And one of the things that we really wanted to focus on was something that Jim talked about in his keynote, which I thought was awesome and could not have aligned more with what we're feeling and thinking at Labs. He talked about this idea of try, learn, modify, which is that we've got to get over this idea that we've got everything planned out. And so we as an industry have to move towards try a new idea, learn from it, and bring that back into your approach, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. And so this is really the focus in Labs. It's a place for experimentation. It's a place for learning. And ultimately, why we're doing this, we're ultimately doing this to create an experience. Actually, one of my favorite things of this entire week was, hopefully, who was at the keynote and saw Easier AG? Get up to the end? Okay, a fair amount of people here. One of the things that Dorothy mentioned, is the woman who was on stage, she talked about the experience of being in Waterford and being in Ireland with the team and how much work had happened. It was just this exhausting experience. And this is what we wanted to do. We wanted to create a memorable experience. Think about some of the best meals you've ever been to with friends or family, right? You can probably still remember, like the wine that you ordered, the food that you ate. This is really something we wanted to do. We wanted to create an experience that people always came back to and remembered, right? It wasn't just the work, it was the experience going through it. And this really led us to what we think of as Labs. It's a place to experiment. It's got the best and brightest from our side and from your side. And it's a place really where we can accelerate the innovation process by trying this try, learn, modify approach. So with all of that in mind, how do you actually engage, right? So we've got this concept of what the lab is, but what might we do together? How might we work together? And so we've come up with another set of metaphors here to explain that. These are all transportation focused because it's about how you can come and work with labs and take us, or we can help you take, how we can work together to get to a new place. So the first one is this idea of disruption. And really the idea here is how can your team get in a speedboat and get to where you're going as fast as possible, right? To build an MVP and build some disruptive prototype or a product that you can either use to disrupt your own organization or maybe disrupt the market. And oftentimes what we're seeing, like in the case of Easier AG, is the work coming out of labs isn't directly going to the marketplace. What people are doing is they're using labs as a way to create a demo to motivate executives, show them the art of the possible, maybe motivate or disrupt the mindset of an industry that might be regulated, so it might be a Ministry of Health or something like that. So an organization will use their work with labs to really change the mindset of their own organization or regulatory organization by building a really disruptive prototype. Here's what we can do together. Here's what's possible. So this was the case of Easier AG. This is really the kind of work they did with us. You saw another customer up on stage this week at the keynotes. That was Optum, and they were talking about how they came and worked with the Innovation Lab to really begin to transform some of their mindset. And so the analogy here is we've got a large organization. It's kind of like an oil tanker. And what we need to do is we need to go to labs so we begin to slowly change the direction, one team at a time, 1 degree at a time, by working with the labs team. And again, Optum was a great example of this, and he talked about the way they've changed their provisioning processes, the way they've changed some of even the budgeting processes that they're using to provision new infrastructure, really about transforming the mindset. All right, and the last metaphor at play here is really about exploration. In the first case, I know where I want to go. I just need to get there as fast as possible. In the second case, I know where I want to go, but I know it's going to take some time to get there. So how do I build change agents to get there? In this case, I have no idea where I want to go. But we want to explore. We want to learn. We want to see the best that's out there. We want to see the best methods, the best tools, the best technology. And then out of that, let's really start to talk about how we move forward. But before I can really move forward, I've really got to explore. I've got to go on a road trip, and I've got to see the art of the possible that way. So those are the 3 ways that you can engage with us. We've talked about the concept of what labs is. So from here, what we want to do is talk to you about the journey our own team has gone on delivering this experience. Because there's a lot of tools behind this. There's a lot of technology behind it. There's a whole lot of people and process behind it. And so we actually think that our experience as a team, the dynamics of our own organization, are probably going to look a lot like yours, in fact. And so again, Burr Sutter gave this great talk. This is an awesome slide. I love this slide. We just stole this right from his deck, from teaching elephants to dance. And we think this is a nice outline of the steps in maturing your organization in its digital competencies. So we're going to go through each of these steps and kind of share anecdotes about how labs has gotten there. Time check, okay. All right, so the first one he has in here is Reordering DevOps, and this can be everyone says this in a sort of nebulous way, and so we're going to kind of dig into this. First and foremost, the labs team is really, really cross-functional. In fact, there's a bunch of labs people in the room here, and they cover all the way from the sales side of the team through some of the agile coaching that we do. We have user experience designers, we've got back-end software engineers, we've got infrastructure folks. So we've got a highly cross-functional team. It's not just dev and ops. It's really all parts of our business. And for us, that was foundational. We have the luxury of changing our reporting structure so that we all report into one group. A lot of organizations don't have that luxury, but we really think it's foundational. If you don't bring different groups together, they're going to see the world differently. And that's really the point of this illusion, which is there's actually only 3 colors on this. But it kind of looks like there's 5 colors on it. And depending on who you talk to, the pink color isn't always pink. You might say pink, but you don't mean the same pink that your teammate means. And when you interact with the rest of the world through tickets and email, you don't actually work on the same team with the same goals and the same schedules and the same priorities. You're never really going to get pink to mean pink. And even something as simple as like defining what a service means, right? Service can mean 8 million things in our industry. And it's incredible how the percentage of issues that our industry has that are related to just simple semantics around words. And for us, this was really something that hit us early as we built this. As we were building this team, we realized that we really needed to set our sights a little bit lower at first. We had these huge goals, but we really needed to break them down into much smaller, more achievable components because we had people from all different disciplines, and no one had ever worked in a team like this. And so we realized very quickly we had to focus on building the team. We had to focus on building a group of people that could communicate first and foremost, and then we could start really getting some big things done. But that was a hard lesson right out of the gate because we really had some strong objectives or some big visions out of the gate, and we really had to prioritize as much as possible. We had to break things down as small as possible and really change the way that we made decisions so that we could all focus on the same thing with the same priority and get it done. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand it back to Øystein. He's going to start to get into how we've delivered some of that.
All right, so now that you know what the Open Innovation Labs is and how we started, I'll talk more about the self-service aspect of that and what we've done with our infrastructure to support people. You basically want to do things in such a way that you eliminate the things that are causing people to be either grumpy or not happy about something. People don't like to wait for results, right? So you really want to try to enable them to do things without filing tickets. Problem tickets are really just for problems. They shouldn't be there for, hey, give me access to this, give me access to that. A happy developer, and actually at times also process people. I'm looking to see if you have any other process people in the room here, but they basically would like to use that self-service infrastructure to set up their environment and make sure that they can validate and use it at the end. And from an ops perspective, you really want to make sure that you have a smooth running infrastructure and that you have no of those problem tickets, right? You really want to just kind of look ahead a little bit and ensure that you enable people to do what they need to do on their own. So there's a good quote there, 2 monologues do not make a dialogue, right? So if you think about this, chicken and the egg, right? Who came first? Development operations, who came first, or who's pulling the biggest load? Who's actually putting the necessary things in place for you to be successful? Developers want infrastructure to support the very newest frameworks, right? I'm sure there's developers in the room that have been thinking to themselves, I wish I could do this, but it's in the latest and greatest, and that's not supported by our ops team, right? Well, the ops team really wants to make sure that whatever the developers are putting together works on the latest and greatest infrastructure. Maybe they just put a new green version of their infrastructure in place in their blue-green deployment, right? But this app doesn't work. So how do we actually accomplish what we want to do and basically be happy together, right? DevOps. So how do we do this? At the same time, move very fast, but we don't want to move so fast that we compromise the stability of the environment. And how do you deploy in a smart and responsible way? At Labs, this is something that we talk about all the time, and we have those same challenges there as well, and we're trying to solve those. And we're trying to solve them for our customers as well, where we actually work together to where they need to be at the end of that journey. As you probably heard a lot at this conference, OpenShift, right? That's key to a lot of what we do at Labs. OpenShift is something that we use to run everywhere. That basically means we're focused on container deployments, and we're doing so by hosting OpenShift in our internal data center, but also public cloud. So we are using OpenStack, AWS, Google Cloud. We're looking at Azure right now, VMware, and bare metal. It doesn't really matter. As long as OpenShift is there and you can access it, we can help eliminate some of that complexity and enable developers and users to do what they need to do. We actually use Ansible for a lot of that. And again, probably you heard a lot about Ansible at this summit, but we're using Ansible and Ansible Tower to drive that in an idempotent way so you can actually apply additional changes to the environment as you go. OpenShift Dedicated, some of you may already be users or customers. That's a great fit for Open Innovation Labs because in that case, you actually eliminate some of the complexity that customers often have in their own environment. But yet you have a dedicated environment that you could use both as part of labs and continue to use afterwards. So from our perspective, we look at all of these above solutions to work really great, but dedicated is also a great fit for what we need. So one of the things that you probably heard referenced in some of the keynotes and everywhere else is the push-button infrastructure, PBI. So that's basically an interactive graphic that we built to allow users to go in to create their own reference architecture for what they need. The image that you see to the left there is basically something that's available on our redhat.com website, where you can just go in and you can play with it, select technologies, and figure out exactly what you want to use as part of your build-out. It's kind of like a shopping cart. You go through and select things, and at the very end, you click a button, and you come to a page where it has a summary. You can even submit that to us as a labs team to start the conversation about where to go next. By the way, just a quick call out, there's a URL that you can go to get some more information about labs if you're interested in that. Automation, I mentioned Ansible. We're using that for a lot of what we need, and OpenShift is key to this. But as you probably know at this point, OpenShift is basically built on Kubernetes and containers. We use that to drive a lot of our infrastructure as code. So let's go a little bit more into how we're doing that. So if you think about the old-fashioned way on how we often used to do things, kind of in this factory here, and you're doing your manual install, you do the configuration, you do your test. Wait, we need to do it again. Let's do a manual install, configuration, and we test. And you keep repeating this. Is there anything wrong with that? Well, you know, it depends a little bit on how you look at it. But we had a bright idea. Let's actually automate this because we don't want to keep repeating. That just consumes our time. We want to spend that time on something else. So we came up with the ultimate solution. Let's use Bash to automate. Wait. Yes, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with Bash. It works great for what it is, but it's not necessarily something that fits our needs at this point. So we basically ended up building a team or a collaboration effort that's called the Castle, the Container Automation Solutions Lab. And that's something that started out with a couple of consultants being out working with customers. And OpenShift 3 came around. We needed to basically get up to speed on what is OpenShift 3. We needed a way of getting this stood up quickly so we can kind of explore it further. Once you've done the initial install, you don't want to keep redoing that. So we needed some automation to do so. Our team grew quickly when we started diving into this, but our scope kind of changed because after doing this a few times, we actually started to get a lot of questions. We had a Slack channel, we had a Trello board, we had a GitHub repo, and other consulting members and even beyond consulting came to us and said, hey, how do you do this? How does this work? So we basically grew to a place where we needed to be even more efficient than we were when we started out. And again, Ansible is something that we leverage for doing that. So now we can do a full deployment of infrastructure components using Ansible. And it's something where we can just eliminate a lot of that complexity that I mentioned, and it's grown to a place where it's actually some of the foundation of the tools that we use for the Open Innovation Labs at this point. As I mentioned before, we can do this on our own internal, but we also have public cloud support, so we can do things with any of the providers out there. Again, as long as OpenShift can run and operate, we can operate. And we use this for infrastructure as code, so we actually track all our changes, all our deployments within a GitLab repo. So in that way, we keep all the actual implementations on the public GitHub, but we keep our private data in our private repo, so we don't have to expose that. But here are a couple of links if you guys are interested in checking out some of the toolings and some of the work that we've done. And open source, feel free to join in and help us out with any of the issues or the additional features. So one of the things that we were kind of thinking about is the third way of DevOps. What is that? It's about creating a culture that fosters two things: continual experimentation, taking risks, and learning from failure. Right? Think about that for a second. You really want to just try to figure out where do we want to go next. And you want to take that risk to go there. It's often comfortable to be just kind of sitting back and doing things that you've done for a long time. But you want to take that risk and see, can I take this little further? Can I take it further? And all of a sudden, you're actually going to build something that people will come to. And they really would like to join you. That's, again, something that we've seen with Castle. And you want to understand that you're repeating this and basically figuring out how to do things by going it over and over again. Again, back to the whole thing of, is it the right way to do the manual way of doing it? Probably not. But you want to repeat it enough so you understand what the different iterations are and how it works. So we actually established something that's called the Communities of Practice as part of Red Hat. And it's basically a forum for us to do a cross-siloed collaboration between teams. So we have our teams, we have engineering, we have professional services, which we are part of, we have sales, and we basically are doing this now actually on a global basis. We have participants in Europe, we have participants in Asia, and all Red Hat is invited to be part of this and contribute into what we do. I mentioned OpenShift. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. I think a lot of you guys are probably familiar with OpenShift at this point, and you're using OpenShift most likely. But it's something that has really opened a lot of doors for us to do the right things. Some of the questions that come up, though, is OpenShift, Kubernetes, and containers. You really allow developers to focus on their app, and you really allow your DevOps team or your ops team to provide the infrastructure that needs to be provided. But what is the best way of deploying into that environment? That is something that has come up for discussion many, many times within labs, and it's something that's also come up for discussion with customers. There's really no one answer that fits all here, right? You really need to analyze and figure out what is the best approach. Again, labs can help with that, right? And when you come in and start working with us around how do you best deploy your microservices? How do you set up the projects to support that? There's really no one good answer for it. CI/CD deployment pipelines, something that's very, very important to what we do. We're going to kind of try to tell the story again around how we did it for labs. And it kind of, as you'll see at the end, it kind of comes full circle. So this is kind of the story behind how we started and how we set off. And labs is a little bit more than 1 year old right now. So we haven't been around for that long, but we have accomplished a lot and we have done a lot of different things. So we set off with the build pipeline, and some of you probably recognize this and use this in your environment. But this is the build pipeline deployment with multiple projects in Jenkins. And you use that to promote between different stages and so on. One of the benefits of this is that it actually includes parallel tracks. So you can build and test things in parallel as you're progressing through your stages. You know what? It didn't actually look that fancy. It didn't look quite right for what we were doing. We didn't want to kind of stick with this because we wanted something that was a little more flashy and could promote a little bit more what we're doing and potentially have some additional features that we needed. So we explored some of the Fabric 8 community solutions and see what they have. And very impressive work. And we spent some time on that. It wasn't necessarily a fit right out of the box. For what we were trying to do as part of labs. So that's where we continued going down the path that we were, and we kind of got the message multiple times. We need Jenkins 2.0. 2.0 is out, we need it, but OpenShift doesn't have it yet. And this is where we basically brought on additional team members that could help us enable some of that features and functionalities that we needed. And I'm going to let Justin take it from here, where he can talk about when he joined the team, where we were going with it, and what we were doing.
All right. So I was one of those people that said, hey, we need to change. We need the latest and greatest feature. So that was my job as the dev, right? But what we quickly realized is that while there was a lot of really cool things, actually first, who in the room is using Jenkins? Just show of hands. All right, leave your hand up if you're using Jenkins 2 pipelines. Okay, so we got a few. if you're in this community, you know a lot has happened here in the last like 12 to 18 months. Like it's a completely new place. So we wanted to move to pipeline because pipeline did this really nice thing about basically making pipeline as code. So we could track this much easier in source control. We wanted to go quickly, and we wanted to enable more people on the team to consume it. That was my driving factor. The old model was very XML configuration driven, and frankly, it was something that an ops team would do, and devs didn't really want to touch. So plus you had to use that UI and all this stuff. So we wanted to move on. But the reality is we got into a cycle that I think a lot of customers get into, and we've seen a million times, which is I want to be on the latest and greatest. It's really not a supported path to that yet. So do you do your own engineering? Do you find a consulting engagement to handle that? In our case, we decided to do some of our own engineering in this space. The trouble is being outside of OpenShift and being outside of a sort of a supported platform here, we had a lot of upkeep and overhead. All of a sudden, we were essentially Jenkins engineers and maintaining that full time. And we had a lean team. We had 4 people at the time, and only 3 of those people were actually working on a code basis. So to have one of those people full-time focused on Jenkins type engineering was just way too much. And so we basically put a halt on that. We said, all right, we made a change, but that change was a lot of work. And we essentially waited for OpenShift to pick up Jenkins 2 and bring it in. And what that quickly did for us is we weren't maintaining VMs anymore. It was very easy for us to quickly spin up Linux containers that did this for us. We were able to use Jenkins S2I inside of OpenShift, and that allowed us to manage configuration. So we weren't writing custom Ansible scripts anymore. We weren't writing custom provisions, and we weren't making sure that we were doing patching of existing servers. We were always just deleting the old one and creating a new one. So we're back to this common theme. We could spend a lot of time and manage this in a VM world, but containers really made this a lot easier. And this sort of, the end of this is that we get to Blue Ocean, and Blue Ocean is this beautiful new experience, and we're really happy that we got here, but the reality was this was really painful. This was a really painful experience for us because we had the operations side of the house who owned Jenkins to begin with and CI/CD to begin with. And then a bunch of app dev guys came in and they said, hey, we're going to take this over and introduce a bunch of new stuff. And operating that for those developers, myself included, stunk. It was bad. We were moving too fast. And we couldn't maintain that stable environment that Øystein was talking about earlier. And so as a result, we got lucky because we had built a team. We had built this cross-functional team. And because of that, we were forced to feel our own pain as a development team. We were going too fast, we were changing too quickly, and we had to own the consequences of that. And so really what came out of this is we started to change the way that we made technology strategy decisions. We can't let ourselves get too ahead of ourselves anymore. We've got all the resources available to us, but sometimes our people and process haven't caught up. So we changed the way we make decisions. We put a kind of a new framework in around who owns what layers of the stack and how we communicate alpha versus beta and how that evolves over time. And essentially, it's made the rate of change more predictable and understandable, so it doesn't come in these big bursts and really screw the team up. So with that, I think a good example of the dev and ops side here, and with that, I'm going to hand it back to Øystein to get into some more of the deployment techniques.
Yeah, so to support all of this, we went into a route where we need a setup that's done in minutes, right? The Open Innovation Labs has a need to be able to quickly spin up new environments. New customers or new engagements would need new environments. We don't want them to coexist. What happens if they go in there and we actually give them typically full access to their environment, cluster admin, root admin, whatever it is. What happens if they do something to the environment? We need to basically reset. So we want something that can support that and be able to quickly redeploy. So we call that push-button infrastructure that we were kind of talking about earlier, and they mentioned as part of keynotes. This is basically the conceptual architecture that we put together for PBI. We have implemented most of this. There's a few things in this, if you're capturing this, that we don't have at this point, but we have enough to be able to drive what we've been talking about, where we have some of the user interfaces in the front ends to drive it. We have the integration layer. We have the actual automation, which again, Ansible is key to a lot of what we do. And we can target a lot of different hosting infrastructure and DevOps tooling to be able to support what we need and what we do. So one of the key things here is Ansible Stacks. And it was basically built to consume some of the automation API that we built out. And again, up to the top right corner, you see some GitHub links for where you can go and explore more of what we have actually implemented. But the automation API, it actually doesn't automate anything, even though it may sound like it will. This is something we defined using, this is something we have defined using Swagger to be able to store away some data so we can actually use it to automate the components that we use as part of labs. And again, Ansible Stacks, our implementation of roles and playbooks to be able to support labs, that's basically what's consuming that. So what was that road trip? Recall we were talking about the road trip as one of the ways of handling a labs engagement. We actually had our own road trip then. So many options were considered and tossed as we were going through this. And that's part of the reason why that diagram I showed earlier, we haven't done all components, because as we were exploring and figuring out what direction we want to go, some of them didn't quite fit, or they were too complex, or they didn't introduce the right things for what we needed. And why do you want to build something that's not needed, right? You really want to spend your time where you get your money back, right? So we basically evaluated everything that we started out with and figured out this is the way we really want to go, this is what we need, and we need to remember who the customer is, right? Who's actually going to be using this? We can build a lot of cool stuff that we think is cool and that we can use and we can do a lot of great things with, but it doesn't necessarily meet the needs of the customer. So we need to think about those things as we go through this, right? At times, it was a bit bumpy. We were kind of changing out parts mid-air on this thing. So as we were going through that, at times we were thinking this is all going to work, and you hit that button to do your push button, and it didn't actually work quite right. So one of the important questions that we've kind of been talking about as we were doing this is, how do you best model the OpenShift and Kubernetes objects? Right? For those of you that actually use OpenShift and Kubernetes, you know that there's a lot of objects in there. Why reinvent the wheel of modeling this in Swagger if you can use OpenShift templates, for example, right? So those are some of the questions that we've gone through and experienced on our own, and that we are often working with our customers on as part of a labs engagement. By the way, I just want to call out that we do have a demo that actually demonstrates all of this. We're not going to do a live demo here today. Sorry, we're not going to try to do it. Last one of the day, I heard there was some problems earlier today. But all of the tools that we have mentioned so far and some of the implementations that you see in screenshots of, we do have a live demo of. So if you want to come and see that or even try it out, just come and talk to us afterwards. It's basically the front-end graphical interface with the infographic. We use the Castle tools to deploy the infrastructure. We have Ansible Stacks to build up the environment that we support, and the automation API that doesn't automate anything to capture and massage all the data. So what are the next steps after this? So we call that teaching the elephant to fly. One of the things mentioned there was microservices. So I don't know, Justin, if you want to just wrap it up and talk a little bit more about microservices and what we have and haven't done there.
Sure. So I'll jump back in. So the reason the automation API doesn't actually automate anything is because we realized that's really not what our customers needed. So we actually built a facade. That facade was intended to do a bunch of automation in the back end, but we realized most people just didn't want to use a REST API for it. Our customers really just wanted to use a command line tool. So they really had no interest in actually consuming an API. And so one of the big lessons learned here was, instead of just keep building and just keep going down the path, when you learn something, like Jim said, try, learn, modify. And we learned halfway through, 75% of the engineering we had planned to do, we just didn't need to do. So we stopped doing it. So don't be afraid to do that. It's actually a good thing. It's not a bad thing. So microservices. We're not going to talk too much about microservices other than to say most people don't need them. So when you walk out of this room, you need to have a really, really, really compelling business reason to be making changes 2 or 3 times a day to really get there. And so even as our own team, we aren't building microservices at the moment within some of our own components. We have a bunch of little libraries and tools that we use, but we're not maintaining a microservices infrastructure, and that was actually one of the decisions with the automation API. We don't need to actually build out these services and keep them live and keep them up for customers. There's actually easier ways to get where we're going. Those ways are kind of old, they're kind of archaic, but they're simple, they're known, and they work. And that's more important to actually make our customers happy than to build a bunch of fancy Spring Boot containers that actually go out and do a bunch of cool REST APIs. So that's our stance on that. There are certainly cases where some people need to go really fast and have a complicated business domain that they need to break down into really small pieces. There's no question about that. But just think 80-20 rule. Most of the time, you don't need it. Most of the time, it's good enough to put a team together, have that team be cross-functional, focus on automation, focus on continuous delivery. For the vast majority of organizations, that's enough. It's going to get you to your business objectives. It's probably a light year away from where you're already at. So that's our stance on microservices. Happy to talk more about that as part of labs. Build out. Again, London going live in 2 weeks, Boston going live sometime in June. And yeah, come visit us online at the labs. We've got some
flyers here if anybody's interested in more information about labs. And like I said, come and visit us on the website and even sign up for labs engagements.
Cool. And with that, we'll take some questions if there's any questions out there. So the question is around, and I think how do we measure our own internal success? Maybe not for a customer engagement, but within our own engineering work. That's been a really interesting. It's been a really interesting bit because one of the things with we sort of have competing mindsets between exploration and actually sort of like lean product development where measurement's important. A big thing that we've done recently was introducing user acceptance testing within our own organization. When we started, we didn't actually do that, right? One person would write a tool, they would just go on and they move into the next bit. So what we did, because we really didn't know what we wanted, it was really R&D, and it was sort of hard to figure out even what the hypothesis would be to test. We really started introducing user acceptance testing within our own team, started doing a bunch of primary research within our customers, so like other consultants. And based on that, we went out and kind of put some example use cases together and went to see if we could go hit them. We'd like to take a more quantitative approach, and we're actively working on how we do that. And it's sort of this competing space of design thinking, trying to understand your customers, and like lean product development. So that's like a constant push and pull that the industry has. And we're trying to move ourselves a little more in the lean product development space now that we understand the problem a little bit better. Yeah, so what actually started was, so this was my idea, so I'll take credit for it. We said, hey, I think I have an idea for how to do this. But the reality was, I actually wasn't the customer that I was building for. So what actually happened, we started going through like a version release cycle, and around version 0.4, I believe it was, we realized, hey, this thing's kind of hard to use. And what we actually did was just kind of paused development completely. And we went and did some primary research. We just went and started interviewing some of the other people in our community and some of the, even within our own team. And we really just looked at like how consultants were doing their day-to-day, and we sort of just inventoried that. When we started, we just didn't do that. We like literally just went out and started writing a bunch of code because I think we had a bunch of consultants who were excited to be engineers. It was a new project. It was greenfield. We kind of just wanted to run. And we hadn't done the primary research just to make sure that we were right. So when we got to 0.4, we were like, all right, we really need to verify this. And at that point in time, it was clear, okay, well, we're just going to shelf that part. We don't need to do it. All right, well, that takes us right here to the top at 5:15. So thank you very much for being here. All right.